Hello everybody. Tonight I'd like to talk about well, not mine, but a Jaguar S-Type 2.5 2005 model that I've been working on now, which has a problem with the transmission. Now the car has no fault codes, it has no errors, there are no warning lights, nothing. But as you can see from the first video, when the car is driven from cold, now it must be cold, you will experience a juddering noise at anything from between 35 miles an hour and above. Now this continues and is more pronounced at about 47-48 miles an hour. Now the problem is, or the problem appears to be, brake related, ABS, traction control, something like that. But there are no warning lights. You can turn the traction control on and off, it will make no difference. You can accelerate through the problem, but the tachometer or the rev counter is fluctuating quite dramatically. The speed seems to stick at 50 miles an hour, there or thereabouts, and it's difficult to drive through. You can accelerate through it, but the car's unwilling. The car seems to be hesitating, pulling back, as it were, through a lack of power. Now the problem does sound like a traction control or an ABS or even the rear brakes binding. But strangely enough, when the car warms up after a 10-minute drive, the noise goes away. The car drives perfectly, the rev counter returns to its normal condition, and the car can sit at 48-47 miles an hour in cruise control and is silent, it drives perfectly. But if you park the car up and leave it to stand, you get the problem again. Once the car is cold, you have the problem at 47-48 miles an hour, there or thereabouts. The noise is pronounced. You can hear it while you're driving the car. It's like a woo, woo, woo type noise. It's difficult to see or difficult to hear in the video, but the problem is there. It's particularly noisy in the back for some reason. But anyway, after reading many forums, I've even bought the Jaguar diagnostic kit, the JLR diagnostics, so I can read what's going on in the car. Now I myself have a 2.7 diesel S-Type, same year, 2005, which drives perfectly. It also has the same 6-speed gearbox, and my car is silent, there's no problem at all. So I've taken all the live data stream information from my car and compared it with the other car, and basically all it's telling me is that the rev counter, the tachometer, or the engine speed itself, is fluctuating at 47-48 miles an hour. So as I said, we've read the forums, we've done a great deal of research into this, and I've been told all kinds of things, from the prop shaft is seizing. Now, oh, by the way, this car has done 170,000 miles, full service history from Jaguar, and drives almost like new. It is quite remarkable. But anyway, I've been told all kinds of things, from the prop shaft, one of the UJs is seizing. That's nonsense in my case. A car with 170,000 miles is unlikely to have a seized UJ joint. But anyway, I've also been told the differential is whining and causing the problem. Although why it should only do it when it's cold is beyond me. But we've had the differential off, checked the play, we even examined it internally and changed the oil. There is no problem with the differential. Then I was told it's a gearbox fault, and then I was told it's a torque converter fault. Now, one of the things my software, the JLR software, can do is that I can flash my car with the latest firmware for various modules in the car. Now the gearbox firmware revision was 2008 on this particular S-Type, which I would imagine is the last revision for an S-Type, as production stopped in 2008. So clearly it wasn't that. So perhaps it's a gearbox fault. Well, eventually, being unable to find the fault, I've also been told wheel bearings. Yes, it's a wheel bearing seizing. That's the problem. Yeah, it's not that. The process of elimination was start with the cheapest first and work up. So, what's the easiest to check? Brakes. So we've run the car on a hydraulic ramp, a hydraulic lift, jacked the rear suspension off the ground, and run the car. And yes, it does sound like the brakes are coming on. So we took the calipers off. And if you run the car without the calipers on, the pistons will automatically try to close. So you must put some metal, preferably some metal, in between the brake pads, or the pistons will close and pop out and you'll have oil everywhere, and hell of a job. But anyway, we ran the car with the calipers off. And I'm not 100% sure whether it made the noise or the noise went away. But we were led led on a goose chase by this anyway. We were told it was the calipers of the brakes. So we were looking at ABS, traction control, and various other electrical faults. But in the end, it wasn't the brakes. So luckily I posted this question on the UK Jaguar forum, and one of the moderators came back and said, try checking your torque converter. Unfortunately, it's impossible to check a torque converter. You either have to buy the bullet and buy a new one, or take it to Jaguar and get them to check the car out. My theory was an hour's labour at Jaguar dealer to give you a diagnostic on the car, which may or may not be correct, would be £100+. I could buy a second-hand low mileage torque converter for a similar amount of money and fit it myself. So that's what me and my brother did. We bought a torque converter. We actually bought a gearbox as well, which didn't need, but they were both cheap. They were from a damaged car. So we have dropped the gearbox, which is a 2R83 7000 HJ, which is a standard 2.5 6-speed ZF gearbox. So we dropped the gearbox. We've also changed the oil prior to this in the gearbox, so it has nice fresh oil, which did, strangely enough, as perhaps you would expect, dampen the noise, but it was still there. So we dropped the gearbox, took the torque converter out. Now the torque converter is pretty much the size of a dinner plate. It is the width of your fist, there or thereabouts. It's quite a heavy bit of kit, and it contains two impellers, one input, one output. It has a clutch inside it, and it is welded shut. You cannot open it, you can't adjust it, you can't check it, you can't measure it. And even if you could take it apart, I don't know what the manufacturer's tolerances are, so even if I measured it, I wouldn't know if it was any good or not. So anyway, we took the torque converter out. In the meantime, we'd bought a gearbox at the same time. So we said, alright, we'll change the whole lock. So I don't know whether it's the gearbox or the torque converter. So we put the gearbox, or tried to put the gearbox in, but the gearbox, as it turned out, had damage to the two location pegs on the inside of the bell housing, where the torque converter input shaft actually connects into the gearbox, where it goes over the splines. There's a little cutout, top and bottom, 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock. This lines up with the two lugs inside the gearbox to give it a location. The location pegs were damaged on the gearbox, so we didn't use it. We actually refitted the old gearbox, but put the new torque converter in. So this meant that obviously there's no oil in the gearbox. So you pop the gearbox back on, bolt it all up, put the prop shaft on, refit the exhaust, connect the sensors up, bolt all the bracketry on, put the starter back in, which is a pig of a job, and eventually when you've finished, bolted everything back on, connect the battery back up. So we did all this. Start the car up in neutral, and proceeded to fill the gearbox with the recommended oil, whatever it is. We used an electric pump for pumping the oil, and it'll pump a litre in a few seconds. So it fills the gearbox quite quickly. The refill plug is in a very awkward position. It's level with the bodywork, the floor of the car, so it's a bit of a pig to get to it. If you're gonna do this, it's probably easy to lower the gearbox slightly, then have a go at doing the filler plug. The actual drain plug is a plastic drain pan on the gearbox, which contains a filter as well, so that's no big drama. But anyway, we refill the oil, put the car in neutral with the engine running, put your foot on the pedal, on the brake, and flick the gearbox to the gears 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then drive neutral reverse back into park. Do this a few times, keep filling the gearbox until it's at normal running temperature. Once the gearbox is level, i.e. it's starting to drip from the fill plug, then you can put the gearbox plug back in, tighten it up, and road test the car. The problem is, of course, the gearbox is now at full operating temperature, so even if the fault was still there, you wouldn't hear it anyway. So you've got to leave the car overnight. So I took the car home. Fortunately, the next morning there was a keen frost. It was about 3 degrees. So I drove the car to work, which is about 13 miles, there or thereabouts, and the car performed perfectly. There was no noise. I even held it in cruise at 47 miles an hour. It's difficult to tell exactly, but from flat cold there was no noise, there was nothing. So it was the torque converter all along. Like I said, I have been told it's the gearbox, I've been told it's the differential, I've been told it's the prop shaft, I've even been told it's the brakes, the ABS and the traction control. Only one person said it was the torque converter, and he was a moderator on the forum, so I'll say thank you to you, and well done UK Jaguar forum. So yeah, the car now drives perfectly with its torque converter in. The torque converter came from I think it was 98,000 mile car. The torque converter that came out had done 170,000 miles. So one could argue it's got 70,000 more miles to go before it starts playing up again. Yeah, and the car drives perfectly now. There's no noise in any gear. The gearbox itself works flawlessly. There's none of this judder or the ZF lurch that people talk about. If you have the latest firmware for the gearbox, you shouldn't really have lurch. If you do, just change the oil in the gearbox. It should cure the problem. I know it did in my 2.7 diesel. Having said that, I've also updated the firmware as well. So my gearbox performs beautifully. So that's it really. That's the life and times of our Jaguar 2.5 petrol. Like I say, if you're suffering from the problem that I've described, it could well be the torque converter. It's very difficult to diagnose unless you are aware of the problems. It's a very strange symptom. We have had the noise occur at 35 miles an hour briefly, but generally speaking it occurred at about 46, 47, 48 miles an hour. If you managed to drive through it up to 50 or above 50, the noise would go away. And also when the car was warm, the noise would go away. So that is quite a telltale sign that there's something going on. And also, before I did anything on the gearbox, we changed the oil. This did change the noise slightly. It dampened the noise. It wasn't quite so pronounced. So clearly, you could argue it was a gearbox fault or a torque converter fault. But as it turned out, it was the torque converter all along. So that's it really. That is the story of my 2.5 torque converter. Thank you very much.